Okay, hopefully that worked out. Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another webinar of From the Ground Up. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nama Blonder. I'm an architect and urban planner with Smart Density. My co-host and dear friend is Lirad Kligman, a co-founder of the Yorkville team, commercial and residential team, a sales team in Toronto. The idea of From the Ground Up is to have a conversation with the founders of the most successful companies in Toronto's real estate, today architecture, and to have an really unique opportunity to talk about founding a business and leading or taking it from an idea to and build a successful company. Lirad, please introduce our very special guest today.
Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Shirley Bloomberg, founding partner of KPMB Architects, which is one of the top architects in Canada. Shirley is a member of the Order of Canada for her contributions to architecture and for her commitment to creating spaces that foster a sense of community. Shirley co-founded KPMB Architects in 1987 and has designed many of the firm's noteworthy and award-winning projects, including the Fort York Public Library, the Robert H. Lee Alumni Center at UBC, and the Center for International Governance Innovation Campus, and recipient of Governor General's Medal, an American Institute of Architects Honor Award, and a Royal Institute of British Architects International Award, so highly decorated. Shirley is a member of the Toronto Community Housing Design Review Panel and established Building Equality in Architecture Toronto, an independent initiative dedicated to the promotion of equality in the profession of architecture. So Shirley, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. And we'd love to start off by you telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into architecture, what inspired you, and what led you to create KPMB.
Thank you, Lirad and Nama. Pleasure to be here. So I was born and raised in apartheid South Africa. And as people probably know, it wasn't exactly the bastion of forward thinking or feminism. So as a child, I loved drawing. I also loved the arts and the sciences. So it seemed to me to be the perfect combination of all of that. And also growing up in South Africa, one is painfully aware of, even as a child, of the social inequities and the kind of systemic social systems of racism, sorry. So that also was what I found very, very interesting, because I think at its sort of heart, being an architect is in a way a huge kind of privilege, because you're able to design the kind of world you want to live in, that you'd like to see bit by bit. I also loved, my dad had a workshop, and in a kind of Rube Goldberg kind of fashion, he did carpentry and put things together, but I used to love hanging around with him, making stuff. So to be honest, I had no idea what I was getting into. So I think I was very fortunate, actually, that it kind of turned out okay. Oh, and there were no role models. So as a teenager, I had absolutely no certainty that one could even practice as an architect. There were no professional women role models in our community at all. So as I say, it was not exactly forward thinking.
It's phenomenal that even without those key role models in your life, you were still able to forge your own path and become really ambitious with your career. So what then inspired you to go and co-found KPMB?
Well, my partners and I all worked with Barton Myers for around 10 years, let's say, give or take a few years either side. And we won Phoenix City Hall, the design competition. And Barton, of course, is American, and didn't much love the climate here. He had settled here because he had studied at the University of Toronto, did graduate studies, and with Jack Diamond, they formed their original practice, Diamond and Myers. So he used the competition win as a way to start a small branch office in Los Angeles. And he was teaching at UCLA. So as time wore on, Barton and his wife decided they wanted to move to Los Angeles. And we were all associates working with him. And what was great about working with Barton is we learned so much. He's a very talented and very intelligent architect. We learned so much of what to do and what not to do. And we were sort of thrown into the deep end. So as very young architects, we got to do all kinds of things with the kind of responsibility that you normally wouldn't have. So it was great teaching for us. He came to us all individually and asked if we would relocate to Los Angeles, and we all declined, which I think was really hard for him to understand. And at the time, we were playing in a baseball league with architects, so we called ourselves the LA Dodgers, but that didn't go down too well in the office. So when it was really like the coach leaving the team, when he relocated, we formed our office, 4 partners, 2 men and 2 women.
So how was it like? Can you share, in what you mentioned about starting a practice when with a competition win, it's something that really belongs to the past. Today, architects, it's impossible to win a competition, that the building will be built. Like, this is no longer a way to start a practice. So if you could, in a way, share with us, the first years, what really took it off the ground, and if you can link it to today, but that will be a separate question.
Sure. Yeah. It was very, very different. So I remember, I think it's about 33, it was 87, 34 years, probably by now, ago, January 31st, it was Barton Myers Associates. When we walked down that corridor, February 1st, none of us will ever forget that feeling. It was KPMB. And we had 16 people. And we started with projects that were underway. So we had just won the Art Gallery of Ontario project. So some projects where we described it almost like a 2-car garage. We had Barton Myers involved and ourselves. Others were projects that we had on our own. And we were very, very fortunate. We had the Kitchener City Hall win very shortly thereafter. I was working on a project in Rhode Island, and the CEO of the toy company Hasbro decided to give us the project because we had started it with Barton Myers. So that was really helpful. And we had the AGO, and then we won at the Queen's Library competition in Kingston. So it was sort of in rapid succession. So it's kind of like lightning striking twice. We started up with a fully equipped practice. Everything was in place. Our team, we had projects, and then we won these competitions. So it's probably not a good model because it's just, it's so, as you know, we don't have the competition system that we have in Europe, here. So it's very difficult. And there's this unpleasant approach to architectural commissions in Canada that you don't qualify unless you've done it before. So if you run that to its logical condition, or conclusion rather, no young architects will ever be able to practice, So.
Okay, let's, about a month ago, we had Jennifer Kismat here as one of our guests, and it was fascinating for those, for the audience. If you didn't have a chance to listen to the webinar with Jennifer Kismat, I highly recommend it. And then Jennifer, described her new project, and before she even said KPMB will be the architect, I had that intuition, and it's not an intuition. That's because it's part of your brand, right? It's a brand you worked really hard to establish, and I'm sure, as I told you, as I asked you in the prep call, it's really hard to build a brand, and I'm sure it also entails saying no to many projects and standing still and being able to pass on projects. Can you talk to us about the KPMB brand, the core values, and how, but not only the high level of the how they actually in practice, or one of the challenges of building a brand?
It's a great question. And when we started, we spoke at length about it. And we developed ground rules for our practice. One of them was every single project, no matter what the size, counts. No bread and butter work. Every single project counts. It's like there is no small role in acting, you know? And then the other thing that we decided was we very much wanted this to be a partnership in the spirit of collaboration. It wasn't the usual hierarchy with a white male at the top. So we were 2 men and 2 women. We worked together at Barton Myers Associates for a good length of time. None of us are married to each other. So we kind of cast about looking at what precedents there were for this. And it's kind of was hard to find. So in a way that was also inspiring to design what we thought was a more kind of hybridized practice and more flattened in terms of hierarchy and highly collaborative. What we also did was we decided that we weren't for everyone in terms of clients. And certain projects we would not go after, and certain architects we wouldn't compete with, because unlike other countries, in North America, there is no minimum fee schedule. And so when you're competing against an architect who would deliver a project, a very different project, but a project for half the fee, there's no point, because the client might not know the difference or care. So we decided actually we would create our own future by going after the kinds of projects and clients that we really wanted to work with, who were design focused. And then what we did was every sort of 7 years, actually, we set ourselves goals. What was it? In the beginning, we started with a lot of interiors because they're quick projects. So in the first 7 years, it was buildings and the kind of institutional buildings and the quality of buildings that the kind of buildings we wanted to be able to work on, and working in the States. We also have been so fortunate that we have a kind of extended family in a way of consultants who are terrific, and we work with them a lot and we really trust them. And we bring consultants in very, very early on when we're thinking about the concept, right? And also a lot of artisans. I think that's what's unique about Toronto, is we're able to do the kind of detailing and custom work that they can do in Europe. In America, a lot of it is catalog shopping. So we've have relationships that go back decades, and we've sort of grown up together in a way, and those are very, very important to us. Working in the States was very important to us. It's obvious, it's a huge market, and the quality of the institutions and the universities. We've been fortunate to work for a lot of Ivy League universities now. I think the other thing that in terms of our core values is, it's about people first, both for the people we're designing with and the way we work together in the office. Teamwork is huge, that kind of respectful collaboration. And then we believe very firmly in the kind of the big idea that really drives a project and creates the agenda for a project. And we're very, very interested in craft, and we're very, very interested in the impact of our work on social and environmental sustainability. And the other thing we decided right away, is that we have to give back, because we felt that we wanted to build the culture of architecture in Toronto, in Canada, And we also decided we would never open an American office or an office elsewhere because we wanted to do it together as a team from here and build the culture here. So we have always taken part of our net earnings, a certain percentage, and that's every year, that's donations to the arts and culture. So, it's about the social well-being of our communities. And we're really, really proud, I would say, that we have spawned so many amazing practices, people who've left KPMB to form their own practices. So that's really wonderful.
That's wonderful. It's great that you've inspired people to start up their own practices. Can you speak a bit about how the role of the architect has changed in the industry from when you started KPMG and over the years as your firm has evolved? Yeah.
Sure. So when I started, it was so simple. It was so straightforward. We didn't have loads of project managers telling us what to do. We had direct connection to our clients. The projects were smaller. It wasn't as complex as things are. And we weren't doing quite as complicated. We did quite a few institutional buildings with Barton, but we didn't. They weren't as complex as the buildings that we do now. So, as architects, I think, pardon me. Remember that thing I said about no minimum fee schedule? What's truly bad about that is architects undercut each other, and the quality of the work goes down. So we don't have a great standard. It's declined. We've given away a lot, I think, in terms of our standing and what we can contribute to society. We're our own worst enemies, in other words. We've given away the job of project management to others. So we've become increasingly sort of disempowered in our profession. What I do think is encouraging about the dreadful global crises that we find ourselves mired in, climate emergency, inequity, migration, etc. There are so many. Is that as architects, we actually have the skill set that can make a real contribution. And I think for the first time in my career, I think we are seriously needed more than ever. We could make a major contribution in, greenhouse gas emissions. Close to 40% of them are from construction activity. So I think we have, given our training, which is also what attracted me to architecture in the first instance, because it's so incredibly broad, and every project you're learning something. It's extraordinary, So given our training and our design thinking, being able to take two opposable thoughts or seemingly contradictory issues and actually design something that addresses both, I think that kind of thinking is really needed, and we can have a huge impact on affordable housing, on greenhouse gas emissions, energy use, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we have a huge role to play. So I think that's very, very exciting.
Thank you for that. That was very important to hear. And I want to build on just what you said. We work in a highly competitive industry, and exactly as you said, you put it brilliantly. What advice would you give young architects that in the beginning or mid-career, and how would you like to shape the future of the profession, if you could?
So I think the advice would be, in a way, all we have is our creative equity to sell, right? I would advise young architects not to compromise. You see so many terrific young students, and then what happens? They disappear in practice. So you have to imagine who you want to be in the world. That's fundamental. And we did that. And I think all my partners and I have probably always done that in our lives, not accepting the conditions we were born into, or, so you have to imagine who you want to be in the world before you can have any hope of actually getting there. So I think to understand actually what's important to you in architecture and work with people who are aligned in terms of philosophy and ambitions about city building as much as possible, and clients as much as possible. And don't be afraid to take on small jobs. Everything you can make important and will have an impact. And I think you've got to keep that kind of optimism. I think architecture is an incredibly optimistic act, don't you? I mean, despite all the evidence to the contrary, we imagine different scenarios that could be amazing, right? So I think if you don't keep that little pilot light going, it could be such a dreary profession. You end up doing, door and window schedules. You might as well not bother. So I don't know if that's helpful, but oh, and the other thing is Philip Johnson, I think, advised it's a good idea to be born very wealthy. Then you don't have to rely on fees.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Okay, so I want to. You said you're very optimistic, and let's talk about a point in the business in your career that was really a point that you thought, there's no coming back from that, or it was a real challenge. Can you share with us such a time?
Well, every day usually has a couple of crises. It's kind of normal, So I guess you if you're the kind of person who gets alarmed easily, it's not a good profession. Things are always issues to do, to solve, and correcting the course of the way the project's going and so on. I'm trying to think. I think it's very, very demanding physically. And when you're raising, I was a single mom for a while. And when you're raising a kid on your own, that's very challenging, the kind of commitment. And I think there's not a lot of space or listening in the profession for what it really means to combine family life with architectural practice. And I think things are, I think people are starting to think about that more. And certainly in our practice, we're starting to think about that more and what we can do to make things more flexible for people. Because there's no question we have incredibly dedicated people, but, like the pandemic. So people with young kids at home are, homeschooling and working at home. So I think there's, it's been male dominated way too long. And I think also architecture is very much a boys' club. And there are more women clients now, so that's good. But when I started, I never had one female professor at school, not one. And we had maybe, I think, 4 or 5 women in the class. So it's, there are not a lot of role models in that respect. So things have improved vastly in that way. I think that's also why I founded Beat along with some close architect female friends, wonderful friends who, and it was really interesting because when we founded it, I think the times I felt, oh, I can't take this anymore, this relates to Beat, was when you allow yourself to be victimized by this system, because it is systemic in architecture. And if you take everything personally, you'll leave. You have to be really, really tough. And I think when we founded Beat, we decided that this was going to be only proactive and that we weren't going to actually sit around in any of our activities and talk about how bad things are, because it's sort of, we don't practice on Mars, we practice on Earth. It's systemic and intersectional. It goes way beyond architecture. It is civilization, right? How society is. So, if we can move the dial, that's great. And so I think it's very helpful to not be deterred by all those sort of issues, about being a woman in the profession, even though it's it's still there. It's less obvious than it was when I started, when it was very, very obvious. But there's still issues that need to be dealt with, and it's an ongoing project.
And I'm hoping you can speak a bit about how your experience has been growing the practice in the United States. We've certainly had some guests and other professionals that have struggled expanding to the US, different culture, different way of doing business. So wondering if you can speak to that experience.
Sure. Right off the bat, I have to say we love working with Americans. We've had wonderful experiences because our clients have been amazing. We've worked with universities in the Northeast, with Princeton University, with Yale, Northwestern, a number of UPenn, a number of universities, and all the university clients are terrific. We've also worked with developers in Denver, and American developers are very different than here. And it's not just building condos with window walls. They don't do that in the States. And the building that we did was a very interesting mixed use residential office and retail building. And the developers continued to own it, and they were interested in quality. So that was such a pleasurable experience. We've had generally really great, we've done office work in design in New York. We just finished related the development company's offices in Hudson Yards recently. We've had really, it's like, we're the minor leagues in Canada and they're the major leagues. And I think our experience has been that we've worked with really great clients there. So we've been very fortunate that way. I would say that the universities in the States too are more fair and reasonable in the way they deal with architects in terms of compensation, and also the way they interact with architects. It's a little old-fashioned, like, for example, Princeton University does an incredibly rigorous search. Once they've chosen you, they actually respect you as an architect, which doesn't happen that much anymore, So they're wonderful to work with. So I think it's just an obvious thing for us to want to do. We've always been late adopters. When everyone rushed into computers, we went in late, which meant that we actually bought the most up-to-date systems and learned from others' mistakes. We never rushed to China, for example, like a lot of other architects did. So we were clear that we wanted to practice in Canada and the US. We have done some work in Europe, and of course we'd love to do more international work. But it's a fundamental part of our practice, we think.
You mentioned that a lot, this working with your ideal clients, and I was just it's an audience question that I was just received. And you also, that was, by the way, your first answer. You decided that you will go after or be proactive or work with the clients and that appreciate design. Yeah. What advice could you give to what does it mean to work with your ideal client? How can you attract your ideal client?
So I wouldn't say there's an ideal client.
You're right.
Right. But I think clients who are more aligned with your philosophy, your values, your core values, because all of that comes out as you work together. And I think it's a kind of a truism that you can't make great architecture without great clients. I think that's very true. So even if it's a house renovation or a cafe or whatever it is, I mean, there are, just like you choose your friends in a way, you know, and you use every kind of connection that you have to try and find clients. And then obviously if things are posted, you apply for it. There's so many different ways. And I think also it's very important to be active in the community. So you do meet different people and so on. So I think even if it's a really modest project, I would say go after a project which resonates with your own values and what you hope to achieve in architecture versus, say, a kind of maybe a development project where the budget is super low and design isn't considered. You know, it's a slippery slope. So you always have to maintain a standard.
And Shirley, we're coming up to the end here, so we always wrap up the episode with a question of a book or podcast or noteworthy speaker that's really inspired you throughout your career. Do you have something that you can share with us that we can voraciously read ourselves after?
Oh gosh. You know, I said I had no role models. So I spent my whole childhood, you might get a sense from the background here. I'm kind of big time into books.
It's an impressive.
My husband as well. and so really I learned a lot from books. They gave me my role models and my direction in life. And I find I don't read fiction that much anymore. But I do, I read a lot of history and biography because I find it just fascinating in terms of understanding human beings, and it gives you it equips you to work with clients and to navigate projects, I think, if you kind of understand how we operate as human beings better. So I love a whole range of books. I don't know if there's any one. I could give you a list of books that are incredibly impactful for me. Sorry, I forgot this bit of the question. So I'm just looking at, okay, what I've got here to prop up my computer. Julian Barnes, Keeping an Eye Open, that's about art. Hilary Mantel, the last of the 3 series on Cromwell, The Mirror and the Light. Great books, love those. And a book on John Coltrane. So it's, you know, I think you learn a lot from history. I think you learn a lot from art and other art forms. So yeah, it wouldn't be just, I mean, one thing, you know, there were things when I was a kid in South Africa that had a deep, deep impression on me. The book, Cry the Beloved Country. I don't think any book has ever had a more apt name about South African apartheid. So certainly things I read when I was a kid sort of made me decide when I was very young, in my early teens, that I would leave the country, which probably not most teens do at that time in their lives, because I didn't want to be complicit in a system like that. Yeah, I don't know if that answers it, but.
Very inspiring.
Oh, there's some good titles in there for sure. Thank you for sharing. So that brings us to the end. Shirley, thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights. And I think that the big lesson learned here is, identify your values, really understand your strategy, and don't compromise. And you can do really great things. And I'm sure you're a role model to thousands of young architects and entrepreneurs that really appreciate your path and hope to create some big change in their own as well. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And keep in mind that our next episode is on Tuesday, March 9th at 11 a.m. We're going to welcome David Wex. He's co-founder and partner of Urban Capital, one of my favorite developers in the city. So thank you very much, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.